to Quilting with Carolyn
and Don.
And yeah, exactly. So we're going to continue here on the Scraps of Sauron, which you see behind us. This episode, we're going to quilt it. So there's a bit of work to be done for that. But first, we have to give you a quick update. It turns out I measured, or rather I gave the wrong measurements for what we had to do. I thought it was 48 by 60 inches. I was wrong.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be 48 by 64 inches. So Carolyn and I get creative, mostly with Carolyn's design idea. So if you look closely, you can see we added a black border to the top and bottom. We already had the ones on the sides. And then we added extra red. We added extra red. That way, when we quilt it on the rack and it's going to shrink, we'll be able to trim it to the proper size. Because it is larger than 48 by 64 now.
Just a smidge.
Yeah. Oh, and that's the binding we're going to use. We already picked this gorgeous blue swirly binding, the marbleized binding that matches with the red. It's going to look great. So, I think that's it. Now, what we're going to do... Oh! Do you want to describe how we're going to do the backing?
So we're going to use some of the leftover yardage to make a pieced back on this. And there is a technique where you can use with the fabric and cut it on the diagonal to make it wider so it will fit a back that is not double the width. So anything less than 80 inches, or actually technically 60 inches wide, you can use a diagonal back piecing method. And so we're going to try that.
I'll show you the link for that because it's cool. So whatever width the fabric is times however many yards you got, you can then tweak that to make a backing. Oh yeah, almost forgot. The fabric! Okay, I have here, holy crap. This is this leftover stack of fabric from when I made Eye of Sauron. It's got to weigh 5 or 6 pounds at least, or more. There's a thud.
Well, he raided some of my stash, so some of that isn't fresh fabric.
True.
But a big chunk of that is stuff that he bought that I said, please don't overbuy.
So, yeah. Anyway, we're going to choose colors from this stash of reds, yellows, and blues, and oranges, and other stuff. We shouldn't even call this backing Scraps of Sauron. It's actually leftovers of Sauron. We're going to make the backing out of this, and I'll show a graphic or something to show you how it's going to work. But what we're going to do now is, these are all with the fabric strips. We're going to sew them all together. It's going to end up, the math says it's going to be about 90 inches wide by 43, 44 inches tall. Then we're going to do magic to make that fit Scraps of Sauron top.
It's a cool piecing technique that you can use with standard width of fabric. If you're a little short width-wise and you're having trouble figuring out how to piece a backing for your quilt.
Now we're going to do the magic. So we got 91.5 inches this way, which is what we wanted. And with the fabric, which is roughly 43 inches this way. Now here's, Carol and I are going to mark the diagonal from one corner to the other, and then the magic will happen after we cut along that line. Okay. Okay, so this is the magic. Carol and I are ready on each end, and we're just going to shift these guys till we get the desired height and width we want. I want to plug this one. Roughly there, 66.
It should be like 3.5 of these.
And see, there it is. Now we're going to make it exactly right, but you can see how instantly it's changed shape. That's what we've done. And here we have the backing for the Scraps of Sauron quilt. It worked out very well, but just the way it did work out, we need to add just a bit of fabric at the very bottom row on the bottom to the red. We have to add some fabric to the red. Then it goes on the rack. Okay, we're in the process of putting on Scraps of Sauron onto the long arm machine. I call it the rack. Carolyn says it's not a rack, it's a long arm. Okay, so the backing is now good side down, bad side up, pinned to the leader rail, and then the batting has now been placed on top. Then we're going to base that batting down and then put the top on top of the batting, and we're ready to start quilting. All right, so Carolyn is doing all the magic for getting this Scraps of Sauron top. Isn't it gorgeous? Putting it onto the long arm. So what she did, I'm going to come in here, is she basted it along the top. You see the gold, and that's the thread color we're going to use. And then she basted it down the sides. Keeps it all nice and square. So now we've got the 3 layers, the backing, the batting, and the top, and they're ready to long arm. Ta-da! Mild surprise there. All right, I'll explain really quickly. While we were working on Scraps of Sauron, which I'll show you in a bit, Carolyn was also working on another side project using leftovers of Sauron. Some of that fabric that I had purchased that I'd never used, correction, that I didn't use all of for Eye of Sauron. So what do you call this, Carolyn?
I don't have a name for it yet. But it was made with 2.5-inch strips from the fabric series that Don used for his Eye of Sauron quilt.
Yeah, and she did it like a jelly roll race. And I actually, about a year or two ago, because Carolyn likes doing this, we did she even teaches jazzed up jelly rolls. So there's going to be a link at the top you can click on to see an older version of this. And the reveal. Da, da, da. And here you have the quilted, but not yet bound, Scraps of Sauron. Came out really well. We had a bit of an adventure. I did the math as far as time, and overall it took us about 6 hours to do this yesterday. Why? If anyone has had somebody else do long arming for them, they may or may not know, and I'm happy to tell you, it takes a lot of time to set up. Get everything right, mount it, do the tension tests, everything, squaring the top. There is as much work on preparation and getting everything's right as there is pressing buttons and having the machine do the pattern itself. Right, Carolyn?
Pretty much.
Here's a close-up of the back with of course also from the leftovers of Sauron. And now you can see the pattern I chose. This is the same pattern for quilting I'm going to use on Eye of Sauron. It's called Heat Wave. Not sure that this is the right size for the pattern. Carolyn has the opinion, and I'm starting to agree with her, that it might be a little too tight, a little too detailed, and it might detract from the overall pattern on the Eye of Sauron. This is exactly the look I wanted. I'm happy with it. The color of the thread is gold. I think it came out great. Again, it's really cool how the gold thread highlights the pattern of the quilting. Now, we're going to trim the quilt and bind it. We ended up going with a red binding instead of a blue. Just thought it actually worked better with the quilt overall. What I'm going to do now is sew the other part of the binding, in other words, the back side. So Carolyn sewed the front part and it obviously stuck out. I then wrapped it around to the back, right? And ironed it over, and then I used glue to tack down this part of the binding because it hasn't been sewn yet. But what I'm going to do now is what I did for Vista boxes. Is I'm going to sew from the front right in the ditch here, all right? With red thread, so it'll mostly disappear. And what it will do is then trap the back of the binding and around there. So you'll see it on the back, but that's okay. That's the beauty of machine sewing the binding. And here's the final product. This comes out great, especially for machine sewing both sides of the binding. So you can see here I've stitched in the ditch along. I'll get my fingers right. See, I've stitched along in the ditch, and when you fold it over, because I use red thread, you can barely see, but it's there, that the seam line on the reverse side is just, about a third of the way up. All right, done. Scraps of Sauron is done. Da da da!
Completely quilted, with the binding all completely sewn on.
Yeah. We tag teamed the binding. Carolyn sewed the first part, I sewed the second part, as you saw. I guess we spent another 2 or 3 days with prepping, cutting, doing the backing, cutting the batting, quilting it, binding it. So maybe 5 days of work, all said and done, give or take.
From beginning to end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not including breaks.
No. But it's done.
So this quilt is now going to go into the quilt show as a challenge quilt that eventually will be donated for as a comfort quilt. Hope you enjoyed our little journey on Scraps of Sauron.
And come and see the quilt show if you're in the Parksville area, June 2024.
There we are.
Look it up.
Happy quilting!